Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition. Every time we do this show, when I do it, I always give this intro about how it is in service of the chief audio officer, and that is the marketer that's responsible for the success of their audio program. And these days, it's hard to even know what audio is because it seems like there's video on everything that is audio. And the other thing that's challenging is that while we're talking about what matters to the brands, the actual practitioners and marketers that power this whole industry, the challenge is you're not usually hearing from them directly. Usually it's people talking about what's going on in the industry and things that will have impact on the marketers that support it. But today we have a very special conversation prepared for you that is actually an opportunity to hear from the mouth of those that keep the lights on for everybody. And frankly, in our view, who sit at the top of the food chain in this industry, all the creators, all the publishers, all the agencies like us. Who do we serve? We all serve at the pleasure of the brands. And so it's very important that from time to time we pause and give them time to talk about what are their priorities and what's on their minds and what are we building and does it actually ladder up to who the true customer is in this industry. So we have a powerhouse team for you today to unpack exactly that and really look at what brands want, kind of going off of a report that we are releasing based on specific feedback that we got at our most recent Chief Audio Officer event. Every summer we do this big event in LA somewhere. In this particular case, it was at Terranea Resort. It was lovely, but we brought together some of the leading thinkers and practitioners in the space to really come and exchange priorities and best practices and really relationship build and chart the course on what the next year of this industry needs to look like. And we're going to unpack some of that for you today. So let me tell you who we have here. First of all, I'm Dan Granger, CEO at Oxford Road. I will be your host on this journey today. We are joined by Justin Fitzpatrick, who is head of performance marketing at Found. Welcome, Justin.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be here.
We have Julianna Crozier, who is associate director of influencer partnerships and growth marketing at Thrive Market. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, so happy to be here and chat.
And then we have somebody who is a partner here that goes back a long way with me in this industry, who's got some great insights to bring as well. That's Will Flaherty, who is SVP of Growth at Row. Welcome, Will.
Hi there. Thank you for having us.
Finally, to round it out, from our team at Oxford Road, we have the man that puts the Oxford in Oxford Road because he actually went to school there rather than just lived on a street with the name. We have Giles Martin.
Thanks for having me.
Always glad to have you, Giles. So welcome, everybody. Let's just get into it. So we all got together this summer and had our, as some have called it, the Davos of podcasting, where we had about 75 marketers all together. 6 of the top 10 buyers of podcast media were all in one room. Hard to really calculate this stuff sometimes, but probably about 15% of the total spend in the marketplace was all represented at this event at our CAO Summit. And, one of the big themes that it's always a topic, right? It's never not been a topic, but I think it's probably even more pronounced than it has been in the past is measurement. And by many of the estimates that we're able to project, there's probably $1 billion opportunity, if not billions of dollars of opportunity that it could be unlocked for the industry and for the growth of the industry just by making progress on this measurement challenge. So that's a major theme of this. We ran a survey to everybody who came. I think most of the attendees filled it out. So we had about 71% of the people that showed up at the thing said that the tools are weaker in this channel than other channels, and 50% of respondents cited limitations in performance data as the main constraint on spend. So, first things first, just catch all for everybody. In your eyes, is this the biggest challenge you face in this channel? Is measurement the biggest problem? Let's start with you, Justin. What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for Found, it definitely is probably the biggest challenge we are facing. My background is in performance marketing. Our company is about 5 years old. And so when you first starting to put together a marketing program, you kind of start from the bottom up, right? You focus on direct response, you launch channels like Meta and Google, and you really build this whole attribution model, decision making model that's really based on your ability to track from click to conversion, right? And so you start there and then you start saying, okay, what are the other channels that we can invest in? What are the other audiences that we want to reach? And inherently, at some point, audio comes up as this really great opportunity. But you kind of built this whole system under the expectation that you can track every single click and right, and that's just not what the beauty of podcasts is today. You're trying to tap into the authenticity of the host, which is something that a lot of the other channels don't have. But I think because of how we built our attribution model and we decide on marketing mix, having some sort of proof of concept or ability to prove out that our dollars are having an impact on our bottom line and that we're seeing the results that we want to see is still really important. And so any sort of improvement that we can make on the measurement side to prove out the efficacy of our ad dollars is going to only enable us to put more and more budget into the channel.
Julianna, is this ringing a bell for you?
Yes, do you see me nodding my head like this?
You've heard
No,
this before.
yes, I have. I mean, obviously, Thrive Market, we're D2C, so we are also very direct response focused, and we've been around for now 10 plus years, but we are still very, very much so focused on lower funnel. And I would say this year is kind of the first time where we are even tapping into more mid to upper funnel campaigns. And I do think podcasting kind of opens up this world where we can test into that more. Kind of going back to what he said about just storytelling and authenticity, like really trying to maintain that with the host. And I think how this platform started. So yeah, I totally agree there. I think any improvement to attribution is something that can only unlock more budget for us. And this year we've spent 2 times more than we did for all of 2024. So I do think it goes to show we are looking to invest more in the channel. And I think that will change in 2026 as we look to maybe not focus as much on conversion and do more of these branded storytelling efforts with our hosts.
Yeah, that solves the problem if you can shift it that way. But then you got to figure out another set of metrics. And what's interesting in podcasting is that the whole place was built kind of on the backs of performance marketers, right? And there's usually this chasm where you get brands coming in, and so often it's, as Justin described, they're really pure performance, and they've been able to de-risk every maneuver through pure digital channels, and then they get into this kind of hybrid environment, and they get stuck to where, okay, if you only buy what you can measure directly, you run into a real challenge, and it's, I think it is increasingly rare that brands are able to cross that chasm into looking at upper funnel metrics. Um, and what we've seen is maybe about half of the revenue in the space is actually coming from brands that were never performance marketers, and they're starting to prop things up. But it'll be very interesting as more companies emerge that are able to go from one to the other. How do you think about that? Like, what do you see as the challenges, or the ways of trying to kind of convert the KPIs that you advertise with? Because I would imagine that requires a lot of stakeholder buy-in.
Yeah, totally. I mean, from Thrive standpoint, 1000%. And I think one of my biggest like fears with the industry, as more people that are direct response focused and are looking for ROI or conversion, the ad load increase. And I think just how muddy the waters have gotten with share of voice. I've been doing podcasts with Thrive for 5 plus years. It's a very, very different market in terms of ad load and also just, read type and integration type. So that is kind of like my biggest fear as more brands come into play. And it's cool to like hear some of these brands that I would have never thought, working with some of these bigger players. But as more and more come in, how do we protect the relationship and just like the authenticity of that two-way partnership? Because now I'm sure as you guys are listening to many different podcasts, I am skipping, I feel like, for half of the show now, and it's across programmatic and host read. And so how do we protect the authenticity of the channel when more people are realizing it can be, strong for direct response and conversion? So they are coming to podcasts now, if it's their full budget or 10% of their budget.
Here. And we are going to get a little bit more into ad load as this conversation progresses, because it's very important. Will, can you help shed some light on the kind of tactical, technical side of this? Why is attribution so hard here as compared to some of the other channels that most performance marketers really get proficient in before they build this one out?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one dynamic is just the visibility in audio that marketers have to impression and into actual conversion, right? So you think about a digital channel, like whether directly or through what the platforms can access, they know, hey, these people saw ads, these people clicked on these ads, these people came to your website. Of course, once they get to your website, we have a good sense of what they did. In audio, right, with some exceptions around maybe streaming or other mediums, like we don't verifiably know who heard the ad. We don't always verifiably know what they did after the fact. And when they take that action, it's not usually in direct response to it. It's in some secondary. Yeah. So there's just some, means where the medium and the way in which people respond to it, and then some of the inherent gaps make it harder to track. Now, that doesn't mean, right, that you should discard this channel as one that's worthless, right? I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. And I think we're probably all believers that, audio can pull a lot harder than some traditional metrics with these limitations would imply. So I think that's kind of what comes down to it. But I think that implores us as marketers and as partners thinking about how to run effective campaigns into how we can improve the data environment that helps us come to better conclusions, right? So how might we enrich our understanding of what just a simple vanity URL or promo code type response might drive an audio ad, and enrich that with an understanding of, for channels where we can get impression data, what that impression and then kind of subsequent conversion looked like. When we can ask our customers, where did you hear about us and what was influential, what drove your decision? And audio tends to disproportionately rate better in those measures than we would think as a percentage of spend. So.
Well, and I think you're all pros at this, but it's interesting that even in 2025, you'll get new advertisers coming into the space and operating under the assumption that every customer that's attributable is actually going to take the time to write down a vanity URL and go and use that vanity URL on a one-to-one basis. And I think what's old news to you all is that you have to have other methods of triangulation, but easier said than done, right? There's so many obstacles in getting that right, particularly when you look at the fact that a show that you might be advertising on, particularly if you're doing host-based buying, that may be distributed on multiple channels, and some of those are more visual, some of those lend themselves to different forms of response, right? And so it gets muddy fast. Giles, I want to put you on the spot a little bit here. Attribution, like, we've been dealing with this as long as I've known you, and really for the 20 years that I've been dealing with audio. It's always been a thing, but it seems like it's getting increasingly pronounced. What has changed in the last year that you think is affecting the challenges brands are facing as they try to sort through this?
Well, I think in podcasting particularly, the biggest sort of obvious elephant in the room is YouTube's growing emergence. It's often cited as the dominant platform. I think that was when a research study reported 39% of people said YouTube was their number one platform of choice. I'm not sure that qualifies it as dominant, and I think the Edison data suggests it's about 26% of daily minutes are used on YouTube. But it's such a huge platform, and it's driving so much audience, new audiences for shows and new audiences for brands. Obviously it can't be ignored. And many advertisers are using pixel-based measurement for, digital audio, and sometimes there are challenges with that, but many advertisers are pretty comfortable with what they've got going on in audio. But now we're starting to see podcasts that might have 50, 75, 90% of their impressions in YouTube. And so that's, the biggest, I would say, single factor that's really muddying the waters for advertisers.
The YouTube thing is a big deal. I mean, it's interesting when I look at the content of our July event in 2024. We were talking about video. We were talking about, the headlines were starting to come out about the rise of video consumption. And then what happened last year, or at the end of 2024, YouTube comes out and proclaims 1 billion active users, which is understandable. Active podcast users monthly, right? It's a big number, and so much of that is international. And there's questions about how do you equate a download to a view and everything like that. But first, there was the reality problem of how do you measure something that is distributed that in two different ways for the same property that requires two different tracking mechanisms or more. And then the second problem is the hype cycle around that, when there's kind of this frenzy of everybody going, all the consumption's on YouTube now. And so I think it really started to escalate this year in terms of the importance of dealing with it, both from a reality perspective, but then compounded by the optics on it. And I think that's what you're getting at, Giles. Open to the group. Does anyone have a perspective on the best practice for dealing with the conflict between an RSS distribution where you can use a pixel to measure and a video where you cannot, when it's the same show that you're buying and the audience is just potentially consuming in two different places? Any tips or ways that you've kind of worked through that?
I think our perspective, has been that ultimately some of these measures are agnostic to that, right? So I think the RSS based measurement is going to maybe be reflected in a pixel based tracker. The YouTube may not, but how did you hear about a survey is not going to be impacted by that, right? That's still going to be agnostic to it. And any type of direct attribution is also going to be agnostic. And in fact, if you depending on how you use video overlays or other aspects, you might actually be able to have a differentiated response pathway for the video feed than the audio insertion. So I think that there are some blindness gaps. There are some tools that are going to be agnostic to it. And I think you've got to look at all of them in suspension with one another to try to get that view. I think ideally it'd be wonderful if you also could get data there, but you can approximate, right? I think you can use the proxies if you know what viewership is and listenership is on the on the given RSS feed, and then you can get some data from the publisher on YouTube. You may be able to understand how that scales and what they look like or how to approximate for it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think as an industry, 2023, 2022, performance marketers were really getting comfortable with the use of pixels because RSS was so dominant for the distribution. There were growing pains in that space. There were some early players, and it needed to get worked out a little bit, but it felt like right at the point that people started getting comfortable with that as primary methodology, it was like the rug got pulled a little bit. Now we got to triangulate again. And we're back to the Heidi how. How did you hear about a survey, which is good if you are converting digitally. It's more challenging with some business models, but or if you can't do that for one reason or another. But like even within that, the how did you hear about a survey is the one thing that can kind of triumph over all the complexities of multi-channel distribution. But even within that, you still have to give some consideration to how you ask the question, because your first layer of the survey may offer podcast, but the consumer may think that you're a YouTube video, right? And so even how you ask that question can be really, really important so that the lane lines don't get confused. And so, I think I think it's worth acknowledging that you guys are operating at an expert level of this, but if you're new coming in, it's not for the faint of heart, and you can't just throw up a standard survey and assume. You really have to get in the corners and work on the nuance of this. Any other comments on this topic before we move on?
Yeah, Dan, the one thing that we've seen is that a lot of our users are excited to tell us who that host or what that publisher was, right? So adding in that secondary question of not did you hear this on YouTube or in a podcast, but which one? They're like thrilled to type in and be like, it was this podcast or it was that podcast, because they have that loyalty, that following, and they want to give credit to the show that they're a huge supporter of. So I think
I'm
that
so
that's actually
glad that
been really
you
great.
brought that second layer up. Can you, for the uninitiated, can you draw that out a little bit and talk about what you mean? Because I'm not sure that most marketers actually have that second layer in place, but maybe you can explain what it is and its importance.
Yeah, sure. And this was a pitfall that Found was falling into too, where we had initially set up a how did you hear about us survey? And we had only just a single question and it had several responses, including YouTube. And then we had actually radio and podcast bundled together, right? So already you're seeing as like podcast blends across more channels, you can see how there's a lot of pitfalls with this survey, right? But so important to us is understanding, well, we run on 40 to 60 different podcasts, which is the one that's actually driving that, which is the host that we want to double down with. And so adding in that secondary layer of a quick follow-up question when someone says, yes, I heard about this on podcast, or yes, I heard about this on YouTube, just quickly asking them what show is it. And there's a lot of great tools out there that make this a really seamless experience. So you actually don't see a huge drop off in conversion or anything like that by adding in that second question.
You need to take this on the road. There are so many people that need to hear the good news of the second layer survey. Who did you work with on that? Who was your third party?
We've been doing it. We were doing it in house, but we're actually in talks with a company called Flaherty. Matt Barr, really great guy.
Yeah.
Actually met him at Chief Audio conference, and we've been talking about potentially working with them moving forward to really clean this up.
Yeah, they see. Look, we never did an RFP or anything like this because we're usually just like going, get a survey. But Fairing seems to be super engaged as a resource to not just have the capabilities to plug it in, but to actually help you set it up, correctly. And Giles, you've written a lot about this, and I think I can't imagine how many times we've rolled you out to make a presentation on survey best practices and how big the buttons should be and how many options you should have. But while we're here, anything you want to add?
Well, I don't know if that actually is really my area.
I'm not saying you were making it up, but
what I was going to say was, it sounds like, our brands here, there's a pretty heavy degree of usage of, surveys or direct type of methodologies, which makes that transition from podcasts, in pure audio into YouTube less of a challenge, as Will was saying, because those direct methodologies or the surveys can still effectively capture response in the same way. If you're more reliant on pixels, you've got one methodology that's working really well in that audio space, and then suddenly there's just this huge void when you go into YouTube. And yes, it's great to have additional perspectives in place, like a survey or like promo codes. For brands that aren't doing that or don't want to do that, I think, what's a standard practice in the industry is you treat a YouTube view the same as an RSS download, and you count up all of those views. You take the pixel-based measurement on the audio impressions, you calculate a response rate, and you apply that same response rate to the video views. And that's emerged, I think, as a sort of industry best practice in the last year. And I do think under the circumstances, it's probably the best that we can do. But it's obviously got a lot of assumptions in it. And, I've now accidentally walked into a pitch for some of the work we've been doing, so just forgive me. But we did some work with Podscribe that actually suggested that this was looking at promo codes and survey responses as a predicted variable. we actually did some work that suggested that the video views were less effective than the audio downloads, which is a bit, I think, counterintuitive to what some people would expect. We're going to be publishing a white paper about that in the next few weeks, hopefully. And we've also explored the passive monitoring technology, which I still think has good degree of promise for sort of getting behind the YouTube walled garden.
So one other pivot on this topic, Giles and I were in a conversation yesterday with some different groups in the industry, and we started talking about the way that advertisers value exposure. And the topic came up, which like really important but rarely talked about, is when you think about a media buy and you're looking at CPM, do you assume that the impression that the unit that informs the CPM is based on what was actually consumed by the audience, or the opportunity to be consumed by the audience? And Giles mentioned that in the UK, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Giles, but that the standard is it's the opportunity to be exposed. And I'm like, that's foreign to me, because I'm like, no, we're there to actually make the impression. But in a download based world, that's actually not necessarily happening. And we don't really talk about the fact that we're equating CPMs across platforms that are doing it totally different. So I would love any reactions on that. Or if you all bump into that on a routine basis.
I would say that I think that the CPM in the long run of any given show is actually less relevant than gauging how it performs and underwriting your price for that piece of media relative to the performance, right? So again, there's a lot of definitional games that can be played when CPMs are defined. What is a view? I know that IAB and other bodies have spent, countless some time in white papers to try to align around like what is a view, what is a listen in the context of an audio program. But ultimately, what that is a basis to start the relationship and the dialogue, and then calibrate what might work. And then the other thing underscored around a CPM is what is the user quality, right? What is the quality of the audience you're reaching? What is the quality of the read and the execution, which is why, again, a network may charge more for a host live endorsed read than a produced DAI inserted spot, right? Because there is an inherent difference in the quality of it. And so I think that it's a comparative tool. It's a tool to use it measured against the bucket of a media where there's consistency, right? So it's helpful to know it in the context of other mediums where it's being measured the same way. But beyond that, it's really just the starting point to say, is this the right basis to begin? And then once we start going, ideally you get enough granular performance data to say this CPM that we have started at is or isn't merited based on how it performs.
And Will, would you say you take that same view with all media that you buy?
Yeah, I would posit the same. I think on paid social channels, right? Like not all, from Meta to TikTok to Snapchat to Pinterest, whatever, maybe they all have different CPM structures, but it doesn't mean inherently that the cheapest CPM platform is the most efficient, right? Because they may have a different ad format, a different user base, a different profile. And so I think that same pattern is consistent across digital channels, across certainly the video and the connected TV ecosystem. In the same way we see, there are certain programs or certain circumstances where we are willing to pay a higher CPM than a kind of run of network rate because we have confidence that content, the audience that's consuming it, will respond at a higher rate, convert at a higher rate, and justify that premium. But again, it's all reasonable and rational, right? In the same token, you have to do the math. And if it is I think the one thing you see in audio and also in something like video is you'll see a tax to apply targeting, right? So if you say a run of network buy is $10 CPM, and this can be an audio or video, either interchangeably, and then you add a $5 CPM for the 20 to 30 aged audience cohort. Well, all of a sudden that has to do 50% better to be more efficient than your run of network. And so I think that that's the one thing that is important to think about is then the relative, comparison between those. Like it has to really make sense. Like the format has to be dramatically different to expect better performance. So I think it's a relative gauge. But yeah, it's consistent across other channels in that same way. You got to gauge what the medium is, how are people responding to it, and what's the format.
Julianna, do you have a perspective on this? How do you think about CPMs, and do you take it all with a grain of salt? Because it's interesting. You see a number of marketers in the space that they may be performance marketers, but they still start with the CPM. And I think the question here now is like, well, okay, so how much stock do you put in that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I mean, very, very similar in that I think it's great to gauge how the show is expecting to perform and also just the industry at that time period. I know we've seen CPMs increase year over year, and just also like leveling with the network and what we can truly expect. And I think with Pixel Performance, that is where it's been so helpful because we can get kind of an early gauge on how that show is performing. And beyond podcast, I mean, I work in the influencer world. And so we're looking at more so cost per view versus CPM, but that is also how we think about how we're going to price out that partner. And then, of course, once performance comes in, then we can renegotiate or we can work on creative, or we will pay a higher cost per view if we think that partner might have a stronger audience with better LTV. So I think there's a lot of other factors that can come into play for paying that premium price. But I totally agree in that it's more of an indicator and starting point versus like end all be all. We're looking very heavily at the CPMs.
Justin, any last words on this one?
I think they covered it. I really would push fellow marketers to focus on deeper funnel metrics when you're deciding. I mean, we're B2B. So for us, immediately 70-80% of the audience, our ad isn't very relevant. And so paying a premium to have better targeting or to work with a show that skews more towards a business owning audience is really worth it for us. And so we're always happy to pay that CPM if we think that really the math is going to work and that the targeting is worth the increased price premium.
Thank you. So we've spent a good amount of time on the video piece and the relationship between measurement, some of the challenges incumbent in this channel, and the bottleneck on the industry. One of the other stats we got, so if measurement was the first challenge, the second challenge that brands said that they're facing is just budget constraints. And I'm curious, when the industry thinks about, okay, what is holding people up? There's kind of the things you can control. There's the things you can't control. How has the economic environment been impacting your businesses and your ways of thinking about advertising in the last year? Will, I'll ask you to go first.
Sure. Yeah, I think we're super conscious of the environment and trying to really listen closely to our members, our prospective members around what they're feeling, what they're seeing. And I think so, we want to reflect that. I think, kind of unique to our business. We've built a really robust offering at Row to access GLP-1 medications through both insurance and cash pay options. And so we have like the best breadth of affordability of, helping people access whatever GLP-1 they can best afford. And so that's I think one theme that we've, I think, been clearer and crisper on in recent months, although we think that has pertinence even in good economic times. But I think broadly, like paying attention to it and being thoughtful, making sure that our marketing is resonant. And we're lucky in that, we are in many cases not a discretionary good, but a very necessary good. Folks, really rely on our service to help them achieve their health goals. And so, somewhat fortunate in that regard. But definitely want to make sure we're continuing to ensure that people are feeling value and really getting what they hope from working with us in these times.
Well, and in thinking about the kind of the broader landscape, if the big thing within this industry, this little micro industry, is video's been a big thing, and that messes up attribution and makes it more complicated, right? Like externally, we hear a lot about tariffs, and there's a lot of brands that I think are directly impacted there, but then there's the secondary effects. And I'm curious if any of you have commentary. You don't even have to speak to the impact on your own business, but have you seen impact in consumer behavior based on the broader economic environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think totally. Thrive's obviously, an online grocery store, and the tariffs definitely impact. I'm sure whatever grocery store you go to, you've seen how that's impacting, the cost. And I go to Trader Joe's a lot and I'm like, how is it this much? I feel like last year it was half this price. So I do think it impacts your everyday. Everybody needs to eat, everybody needs groceries. So I also just think it's been kind of a crazy year. And I think there's been so much going on. And so people feel that impact financially and emotionally. And so when it comes to marketing, how do you make sure you're, marketing your product, but also resonating with how consumers are feeling and kind of tying into that emotion, which is, of course, where podcasting is amazing because the hosts tell that story for you and then go back and personalize it. But yeah, no, back to the question, I definitely think we have felt the tariffs and also just the economic shift a little bit as people are a bit tighter with their money, cost comparison, and just like really thinking with their dollar.
Is that getting better or worse as the year goes on?
Well, I would say for us, with Thrive, Q4 is always softer for us. It's not a time where we really grow too much. Q1 is huge. So for us, we usually kind of temper down right now. But I would say across the board, Q2 and Q3 were softer than expected in terms of growing and, really bringing on new members. And I do think it's because of the economy and kind of shifts there.
Justin, anything from your view? I guess you're in a space where you may be deeply impacted by this, and that may be an opportunity and a threat at the same time, right?
Yeah, I think you nailed it there, Dan. We're seeing it as a headwind and a tailwind. I think with the economic uncertainty and tariffs, right? We support small business owners, think employees of 1 to 10 folks, and we provide them financial services to help their businesses grow. And one of the hardest things is the uncertainty, the tariffs, they can have a huge impact on your business. So I think we've seen a little bit of a headwind there indirectly where our customers might be thinking a little bit more short term or shoring up a little bit. But on the flip side, during economic hardship, you see a lot of people turn towards starting their own business, thinking about going the freelance, the self employed route, spinning up a little bit of a side hustle. And so, an app like Found that makes the financial complexity of that, the bookkeeping, the invoices, the counter, like really streamlines that for that's a very attractive message of, hey, it's actually really easy to manage your finances if you want to go and try starting your own business or doing something on your own. And so I think resonating with what I heard from Will there, it's and Juliana, it's really about tapping into that, make sure your messaging is adjusting based on what that sentiment is. And so talking about how easy it is to go and do your own thing has been something that's really paid dividends in this new economic environment for us.
It's so interesting. I remember working really closely with LegalZoom in 2008 when we had the Great Recession, and the number of new incorporations and LLCs being formed during that period of time, it was like peak. And I think that's what you're saying. And yeah, definitely a through line there that we can't control the circumstances around us a lot of times. And that will put, I think, a lot of compression on budgets. I don't think this has been a particularly robust year where everybody's saying, great time to take risk, right? But we all still have the jobs that we have. And I'm definitely getting the theme that, so maybe we need to focus more on the value side of the messaging. There's always a way to adapt and make sure that we're staying in tune with what the consumers are thinking. So who knows? Maybe creative does matter. All right, let's talk programmatic for a second. This is so interesting because when you think about podcasting as a channel specifically, Julianna, you've done an excellent job representing, I think, the heart and the spirit of the channel, right? Like this thing started as this like pirate radio, soulful, non-commercial place for misfits to go. Anybody can have their own show and have a voice, right? And that authenticity has really been at the heart of what makes it valuable. And then word spreads and money comes in, and then 4 million podcasts exist, and every celebrity and everybody's got one. And ultimately now you've got some shows with 20 ads an hour running, right? And here we are trying to walk the line between wanting to leverage the trust and the authenticity in the channel, and yet needing to scale efficiently and de-risk, right? And trying to do things in a somewhat digital way. So how do you think about balancing those priorities? And is programmatic, is it a both and in your view, or is that like a thing to be avoided because it's like it's just a path to making it terrestrial radio?
I mean, it definitely worries me a bit in terms of where it's going, but I will say I do think it can be both and for sure if you use it the right way. Um, Personally, with programmatic, I do think it's great for needing to scale up on the channel or with marketing pushes or sales, really tailored creative, and maybe paying that higher premium to do some more audience targeting. I think that's where it's great. But speaking on host read and podcasts specifically, we were talking about CPMs earlier. My first thing I'm looking at when I'm presented with the media plan is actually that share of voice. And I'm looking to see like, okay, if we're going to have 10%, even though it's an embedded read, like that's just a solid no. Like we're not going to work with this show. And it's usually by network, right? A lot of these networks might be more notorious for having just more ad loads. And so that is actually the first indicator for me to kind of understand too, like how the network is approaching it. But that is kind of like my take on it. I think as an active podcast listener myself, I am definitely hyper aware of how the reads have also I think the personalization has gone down just because they are, 3 back to back, and that's just in mid roll. So that's something that I do think creative is king, and trying to weave in a read so that it doesn't seem like a read. It's like near impossible these days, but that is like what I'm always trying to relay to our hosts. They will still read that brief, even though I ask them not to verbatim. But that's something that we're constantly kind of challenging them with as well. And how do we do maybe more custom integrations to fit in more natively? We're testing with a few partners. I've seen some big players in the game like Mint and Duncan do a great job with having these hotlines and like truly dedicated episodes to their brand that's more storytelling native. And I think that's kind of where the industry is going, specifically with creators that are podcasters. I think now they're kind of one and the same, but influencers or celebs that have their podcasts having these more exclusive type partnerships with their brands.
Well said. Justin, how do you think about the walking the line between the authenticity of that host read and the opportunity of things like programmatic, where the industry is certainly heading?
Yeah, to be honest, we are just starting to invest in programmatic, and the paradigm we've taken is really almost treating it like a separate channel, where it really is just about buying those impressions like we talked about a little bit earlier and seeing like, hey, we bought these impressions, what's the ROI on that investment? Versus this idea and concept of really tapping into the trust and credibility of that host. And that's where I think I just want to really echo what Julianna was saying around ensuring that you do have a right share of voice, that the host is willing to lean in. I think one of the things we really what I wish hosts would understand a little bit more, what I'd love to see is we would be willing to spend so much money or really build a long-term partnership if we could really nail that first episode, if we could get that proof of concept and say, hey, there's something here with this show. And so a little bit of customization, really building that partnership up front with the host and getting a strong first read that's going to show, hey, there's some success here. That's going to enable us to then say, how do we 5, 10, 50x that budget? How do we double our share of voice with you guys? How do we trust you to expand to YouTube if you have a Substack to go there? Trust you to even test into a little bit more programmatic if that's like. So I think it's really about the host. I see that host show is very different from programmatic and wanting to say, hey, let's build something that's curated, feels like you're really endorsing our product. And if that's the case, then like we've got something great here, and how do we just scale that together to build like a really sustainable long-term partnership?
Well said. Will, any final thoughts to add on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, they're not. We don't see them as mutually exclusive. I think that they can be complementary and should be complementary strategies. I think the one thought is, the other opportunities. How do you marry these? Do you find your talent and your best voices and pull them into a programmatic creative? I think that's completely an opportunity, and then you get extension of it. I think it comes back to, again, creative. Like, what is the core message you're delivering? Is it effective? I think marketers like ourselves and others have really flocked to the endorsed medium because it is so effective. And so the fact that they're reading it live baked into the show versus it being recorded or maybe even slightly produced and appearing elsewhere, um, inherently, if that message is consistent and the creative's strong, it shouldn't perform half as good just because it's DAI or because it is in a produced spot, right? So I think using those strategies in a complementary way, but maintaining consistency on the creative and the things that really make it effective is a way to kind of really get the best of both worlds.
Okay, I'm seeing that we're running out of time here, and there's a few other things I want to get your hot takes on. So I'm going to make up a little game on the fly. I'm going to throw out the topic, and I want you to tell me out of 5 how important this is to you at this moment in time in your ad program, because these things came up as concerns in our report. And one of them we've already started touching on, and it is ad load within the space. So, Julianna, I'm going to start with you. Out of 5, how big a deal is this to you right now?
This is a 5 for me. It's really one that I just don't want the industry to go that route. Like, I think it to preserve it, I would like to want these hosts to have that true relationship with the brands they're working with versus just monetizing. So yeah, I'm gonna go full 5 for that one.
Don't kill the golden goose, the authenticity. Okay, Justin.
I'll also say a 5. I think it's a tragedy of the commons where in the short term, it's so easy to just add in that incremental read, especially when most marketers are tracking in RSS pixels. And so they'll just see, yep, downloads, number of impressions. But it's something that's going to in the long term hurt everyone, I think.
Will?
For us specifically, I mean, zooming out not just on the ecosystem, but maybe zoomed in more on us. Less of a concern because I think our product offering and the kind of unique personal endorsement that someone's bringing to bear, we think stands out a bit more. When we engage with talent, we're doing so in a way where they're really telling a deep personal health story and how Row has helped them achieve their health goals. And so we kind of, somewhat feel that stands out amidst other ads. It's less of an immediate concern. I understand why shows are incented to do this. I think one response can really be to say, like, that needs to be reflected in the media cost, right? Like that being something that's a, one of one ad in a show versus a one of 8 in an ad break. That should be reflected in the way in which the media is priced.
You still got to give me a number.
I said 3.
Oh, you did. I'm sorry, I missed it. Okay, we got a 3. All right, very good. Giles, I miss your voice. What are you at? Where are you at?
Well, I don't know if I can speak on behalf of all of our clients, but it's definitely significant. I mean, the 3 to a 4, probably, I would say. I mean, ultimately, it's about how much it hurts performance. We have done work showing that response rates go down as ad load goes up. And yeah, if the problem exacerbates, response will probably continue to go down. So it's definitely a concern.
Well, quick plug, Giles co-authored our report on ad load and the relativity with performance. And we introduced something we called the Oxford clock and basically shared it with all the publishers to say, hey, this is where the cliffs are, where the more you expand your ad inventory, the more it starts to erode ad performance. I think we came up with like 8 units an hour is probably the sweet spot to maximize revenue without kind of killing the experience. But some are doing 20. Okay. Going fast here. AI voices, the proliferation of AI coming into the space. How big a concern is this for you? Let's, we'll start with you this time. Out of 5.
I think, again, specific to us, I think less concerned because we rely on, real authentic human voices telling real authentic human stories. So I'm going to give it a 2 because again, we really overemphasize in telling real human stories.
Perfect. Okay, Justin, how about you?
I'm going to say a 3 for this one. I think if it's a bigger concern for us if it's using AI to emulate the host voice, because we are trying to tap into that authenticity, build that not necessarily personal endorsement, but some sort of endorsement from the host where it feels like they deeply understand our product and how it helps small businesses. But as far as just using it in general, I think it's fine if you want to use that for programmatic. I see it kind of blending the lines of, working with an actor or a different voice talent to try and get the best read.
Julianna.
Yeah, I would say a 3 as well. I think as with AI, it can change so quickly. So that's kind of why it's a 3 for me. I don't really know what the next few months could look like with that. We're not really too concerned about it right now, again, because we have such a more like host-read type strategy. But yeah, you never know how it'll shift. So it's always like creeping up. So I'm going to give it a 3.
Giles.
I think that Justin, hit the really important distinction that I wanted to make. Like an AI voice, I think people are very quickly going to become accustomed to and won't even be able to tell the difference between an AI voice and a human voice. But an AI voice pretending to be Joe Rogan is a whole different thing. And is it a real endorsement from a real human, to Will's point, or is it a fake endorsement from a real human or a fake human? So those are, I think, really important considerations. And then also, I mean, there's just the issue of sort of AI generated content generally. I can't remember who the Wondery executive who's launched that company. I can't remember the name of the company. They're churning out thousands and thousands of podcasts every day. Ingesting content from the internet, turning it into AI generated voice content. It's a lot of garbage, no disrespect. But I think marketers are going to be pretty concerned about being around that type of thing.
So I'm going to put my opinion out there too, and just because I think it's important for our agency, like we need the market to understand this has the potential to be a 5 for that reason, right? If you start diluting or you start fooling a consumer into thinking that an endorsement, a personal recommendation is real and it is not, you've crossed a red line that has monumental consequences. That being said, if an AI voice can read a biography that I would have done on Audible and it wouldn't have been any different to me, like who cares? And so that's great if it can enhance the content. But I think the key thing is there needs to be disclosure and there needs to be clarity with the consumer that this is coming from a person or not. With that, I think it's all good. Without that, it's potentially really a potential erosion of trust. So we didn't get to everything, but I think we got to a lot of good stuff. And you guys are freaking great at this. I'd love to get this band back together for more times, because I think you're all pros and you bring great perspectives to it. So thank you for making time to do this. I want to say thank you to everyone that has taken the time to listen today to the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to influence responsibly. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to us by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. I know you all do. It's called The Influencer. It's free, comes out every week, just like this podcast. If you have feedback for us, info@oxfordroad.com. Special thanks to all of our guests, Julianna, Will, Justin, Giles. Well done, and thank you to the team that made it all possible. Haley, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Everett, Neil, and the team at Podcast One. It really takes a village. Thanks, everybody.